Hello, welcome back to Raising Arrows Mama. My name is Heather, and today I'm going to talk to you about the elusive idea of history streams and history spines in a Charlotte Mason homeschool. So please forgive the rocking. I've got a little one here who's only 2 months old, and she is wanting to move. This is the time I have. So I will try not to make you sick from my motion, but let's dive into history streams and history spines. I was talking to one of you lovely viewers yesterday, I believe, about how we make this history cycle work. And the reason I think there's confusion is because we follow kind of a loose ADE, a Delectable Education's guidelines. However, I've never had a Delectable Education consult. I haven't even listened to all their podcasts or done all their things on their blog. I am not an ADE expert, okay? So if you want to know what they actually recommend, what they do, please go check it out. And if you are reading Charlotte Mason's volumes, she doesn't really outline a specific, you should do this and this and this for history. She says that you should live along the lives of other, and I'm butchering the quote, but you should live along those lives of greats from those different history time periods through biographies. Historical fictions are wonderful add-ins and have a basic history spine. And so I'm going to go over what all that means and how I make it work in my home. If you have seen my previous videos on how I create our own curriculum, that may help clarify it a little bit. But if not, I hope that this video will make it very clear. So if you're looking at the grid, and I will put ADE's grid, and somebody referred to it as columns and rows, and I don't know what all that is. But I do know that you have 4 history time periods and you're on a 4-year cycle. So ideally, if you start this with your child in year 1, you will hit every one of those time periods 3 times in their education. Now, I came to that late, and if you watched my video and went to the blog, you see that my timeline is not exactly what theirs is. It is slightly different. And so the basic principle is that I have a beginning of American history, and then I have early American history, middle American history, and modern American history, okay? Those are the kind of time periods I follow, and they really kind of follow centuries. So you'll want to check that out, specifically on the blog, and I will link it below. But this coming year, we will be doing the 1900s all the way up to present day, so it's a little bit more than a century. It may have to go over a year, but I don't think so. That's a whole nother video. Today, I'm going to give you some examples from what we did this past year, which was the 1800s. And when you look at that grid of here's what you do at what form and what ages, I don't worry about form too much, other than I don't do ancient history until they're at least in 4th grade. And then I add in church history for some things. So it's about to get confusing, and I hope that it doesn't leave you confusing. Basically, we have 4 history streams that we are following each year. We're following American history, world history, ancient history if you're 4th grade and over, and church history. I will caution that sometimes I trade out church history for state history every couple of years, just because we haven't, probably every 3 or 4 years, just because I want to make sure that they get that in there, and we are pretty heavy on church history being a ministry family. That said, those are our 4 streams of history, okay? And Charlotte Mason says, your country that you're from, your neighboring country, and then ancient history. Those are hers. And so for them, it's, England and then France and Europe, and then ancient history as well. And so here in America, I tend to follow America, then British history, and then the rest of the world kind of follows suit. And it just depends on what century we're in. So this past year, we've done the 1800s. And like I said, you can check out my schedule from before, because I had basically early American history, pre-American, so to speak, age of exploration, things like that. And then we had pre-American, which I think was like 1650 to 1800, basically covering all the way up to the Revolution, and then a little bit beyond. And then this year, we've been doing the 1800s solidly. And we're finishing up with the Civil War and a few other things. I know the Civil War is not the end. We're just going to touch on Reconstruction, but I digress. Basically, what I want to say is that if you can, ideally, say you have one child and you're going to give them all the attention, you would have a spine for all 4 of those streams. That is going to be a text that goes over all those nitty-gritty things, not a textbook, but it's going to be a living book that touches on all those different subjects of everything that happened in that time period. Then you're going to have a biography that aligns with that time period as well for every term, and a historical fiction as well. I have a lot of students, so I don't necessarily follow that, though I have tried. If you look at my schedule from last year, I did try to do that and we couldn't get it all done. This year I did try to combine a few things, and I don't have the book in front of me, but we used Abraham Lincoln's World by Genevieve Foster as our spine, and that combines American and world history in a really great way for my 8th grade and under. And so I highly recommend that. So we had that spine that was America and world history combined. And then we had an ancient history spine, which was the story of the Romans by Gerber. And we did that all year long. And we're not going to finish it, and that's okay. And then we have a church spine, which we actually chose to drop this year, just because of baby and health issues and other things, but Trial and Triumph. And so those were our three spines rather, because we combined American and world. So we had those, and those books all covered for the whole year. They weren't by semester, and like I said, it was for my 8th grade and down. My high schooler had her own, and I think, oh, it's right here. I have one of her spines with us. So she had an American spine, which is breaking at the spine, but is the Sections and the Civil War by A Basic History of the United States by Clarence B. Carson. She doesn't super love this version. We were trying out 2 different spines with her this year. But I think this one actually ended up being the favorite. So we have an American history spine, and then she has a world history spine, which is Churchill, which she doesn't love, but it is a good history spine. Then she had an ancient history spine, which was the Roman Way, and her church history is Fox's Book of Martyrs. So my high schooler had all 4 of those spines that she did independently. And what I would do is she would have one set of readings from each book each week. That's it. So it sounds like a lot, and it is. It's been hard for her to keep up with as a 9th grader at age 14, but she is able to do it. For the rest of us, we had, like I said, Abraham Lincoln's World, the story of the Romans, and then Trial and Triumph, which we ended up dropping just because of personal reasons. We just couldn't get to it this year. And so those are our spines, and we'll do 1 reading from each a week. A reading might be a whole chapter, it might be multiple chapters, maybe a section of a chapter. It just depends on the book, the length of time we're willing to give to it each week. Then I get into historical fiction and biography. This is just what I do. This is not a Charlotte Mason thing. This is just what I do. I think biographies are crucial to studying a history format in this living books way. However, it doesn't have to be the way I do it. It doesn't have to be done in a specific way. There are lots of ways to go about this. So, for example, I will try to have a biography of a historical figure from each century for each term. So my girls had, I know, Abraham Lincoln, Meriwether Lewis was first. Then we had Abraham Lincoln, and then they had Florence Nightingale. And so you see 2 Americans, and then Florence Nightingale is an American, but you get into the Crimean War in her biographies, and so that has a little bit of world history. Then my kids also have a church biography. Again, we're going above and beyond here. So now each term they had a Christian hero that they were reading about. So they had Adoniram Judson, can't remember who was in the middle, and then they had George Mueller. And so you're getting world history of that time period as well. And then because we're extra and because we just love biographies, we throw in a science biography. And we only got to 2 this year, George Washington Carver and, I can't remember. I want to say it was Isaac Newton, but I could be wrong. But they had those that they read throughout the year as well, giving more world history through those biographies. And then we have historical fiction. And as I was reading more of Charlotte Mason's actual writings, I see that those are actually supposed to be reserved for afternoon occupations or free reads. And so we haven't put it that way because they are some of my kids' favorite books. But you could do it either way. And again, I try to choose 1 per stream per term, if that makes sense. But that doesn't always work out. And so let's start with some examples from my high schooler, because 1 per term, per stream, per child ends up like millions of books. So let's back off a little bit. Let's go back to my high school student. So she had her 4 history spines. That's a lot, all right? She's got a lot going on. Then for historical fiction, she has 3 books. 1 was only 1 term, Scarlet Pimpernel. And then she also read A Tale of Two Cities, which took 2 terms. And so those were finishing up French Revolution, which my kids specifically asked for from last year. So we got some world history and historical fiction there. Then she has some ancient history, and that's Ben Hur. And this is a big book, guys. She's been doing it all year, and she is really going to struggle to finish in the next few weeks. But Ben Hur gives her ancient history. And so instead of having 3 ancient history books, she had one split up over 36 weeks of school. And so that helps. Same with Uncle Tom's Cabin. This is her American historical fiction, and it's another big book. And these have some deep, hard topics in them. And so she has been reading this for 2 terms because it's a big book. And so our historical fiction, while yes, we have one for each, we have one for each history stream, we are going to make sure that they don't have too much reading in one week. And that brings me to her biography. So we started the year with a biography called Undaunted Courage. I realized after purchasing the book, pre-reading the book, this was not the book I meant to get. But it was a really good book. But again, it was beefy. Okay, this was huge. And I assigned her way too many chapters a week to get through because it's fairly tiny print. And so we had to back off. And this ended up being 2 terms. And I think I let her skip the last chapter or so because we had covered it in our history spine pretty thoroughly as well. And so her biography also did not go for just 1 term. And it just kind of depends on what it is. If it's like a YWAM, my high schooler can read those in a day. And so those go a little bit quicker. But if she's doing something at her level like that, it's going to take more than 1 term. And so she read that for her American history biography, but then she also read a thick Abraham Lincoln history biography that she's working on still. And so those are her American biographies, only 2 for the year. And they're big books. And so while it seems like you could ideally have 4 history spines, 4 historical fictions, and 4 biographies for each student each term at their level, it doesn't always work out that way. I hope that makes sense. So like I said, my high schooler had 4 history spines. She has 3 historical fiction categories, but in each one, she only had 1 to 2 books for the year in those historical fictions, and the same for biography. She has 3 categories, but she only does 1 to 2 for each category per year. And then I have an example of my 8th grader. Now she does her history spines with us as a family, and so those look very different. And then she has, trying to reach them here, she has hers that are different. So for historical fiction, she had For the Temple for the whole year, because this is a big book, tiny print, and it's a big story. And actually, ancient history is not a primary for us at the moment. Sorry, little one's getting wiggly here. And so we didn't, 1 was enough for her. So that was her historical fiction. Again, she did all her spines with us as a family during morning time. Then she had historical fiction in America. She had Elijah of Buxton, which for her, who is a struggling reader, she actually read this over 2 terms. And then she had another one, which I can't recall off the top of my head. It's all on my blog. But, and so she read this for 2 terms and 1 other book for the year. And then she has a world history historical fiction, and she had books. This was her most recent, was Words on Fire by Jennifer Nielsen, which talks about the Russian invasion of Lithuania in the in the 1800s. And so there are these varying levels. So sometimes they get all 3 books, but like for world history, she had this and then Oliver Twist. Oliver Twist is a long book, so Oliver Twist is actually taking them the entire year. But because this is such a good book, I went ahead and said, well, why don't you add this into your week? And so she lovingly did. And then for biographies, again, you could just do 1 historical biography for your time period for each term. And that's 3 biographies. Not bad. My kids love biographies, so we do more. So we have American history biographies, we have science biographies, and we have Christian hero biographies. And my kids love them, so they don't actually complain about having 9 biographies a year that they read. Anywhere between 6 and 9 biographies a year, depending on how long they are. That's the crux of our history. And the historical fiction is fun, but it is extra. And so we don't always do all three of those. And so I did kind of write this up, and I will try to share here, but I have 4 history spines, and then I have our historical fiction, and then I have our biography. And it doesn't have to be that complicated. You can cut some of those categories out. And I do find ones that are for each child at their level and of their interest level. For certain things, like my oldest, we all read books about Florence Nightingale this year because my oldest has a medical penchant, and so that's what we did. George Mueller is a family favorite, and so we kind of tailor it to our own children. We tailor it to our own family, and we make it work. But I try to keep it not overwhelming. I will have another video about our history for this next year because it is a bit overwhelming to cover the 1900s at the level that we need to for all of my 6 children that will be students next year. But the focus that I did was breaking it down into these simple steps. Find a spine, try to combine for the spine as much as we can. If my high schooler was up for it, I would have her read history spine with us too. She prefers to do it by herself, and that's okay. And then historical fiction, optional. Move it to the afternoon, put it as a free read, or put it as as something that is not the priority. And then biography, do as much or as little as you need. I would say 1 biography a year would be great. That would be amazing. If your child read a history spine in all those different streams and read 1 biography for the year, that would be a great starting point. If your child is up for it, if they're a great reader, they're getting along, you found something at their level that also interests them and isn't overwhelming, then try doing a biography for each term that covers the year. Choose one that's for American history, choose 1 biography that's for world history, and choose one that's for, if you can, ancient history. I've not done that for ancient history because we do Plutarch's Lives together, and I feel like that covers that. But you can do it for whatever you want. And keep it very simple. This is your homeschool. Tailor it to your family and don't let it become too overwhelming. Like I've said before, you can always cut back later on, but it is nice, I have noticed, to start out small and add on in the beginning. The only reason we have this many is because we started small. We gained our confidence, gained our aptitude, and moved on. So I hope this helps answer some of your questions about history streams and history spines in our Charlotte Mason homeschool. If you have any questions, drop them below. If you made it to the end of this video, drop your favorite biography below and share with everyone because we're always on the lookout for great biographies. Thank you so much for watching and have a blessed day.